And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 165 at long last. Yes, for the 3 weeks I've been trying to get this episode out. But today we're going to be talking about photographing from above, looking straight down on the subject and what a change that has. So here we are live on YouTube. If you do happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know where the weather's like. Let me know what you're from. Let's get the chat started. Make me feel welcome that I'm back again. So yes, and welcome. Here we are live on YouTube. So yes, leave me a comment unless you happen to be watching the recorded version, because of course there are 164 previous other recorded versions are here on YouTube as well of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. So if you're looking to improve your understanding of photography, you are in the right place. Make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell, make sure you get notified, all that kind of stuff. Tell your friends about it as well. So I can see we've got a few comments in here already. That's great. Robert says, howdy all from Texas. Pat says, hi everybody, good to be back. A bit chilly here. April says, hello everyone from a sunny and warm Long Island, New York. It's nice to be back and Kim is turning a corner. Rosemary says, good morning everyone. Isn't it great to be back? We all wish you the best of health, Kim. Once our marine layer burns off here, it should be pleasantly sunny. Thank you. Maggie says, hello from a cloudy Castle Douglas. And yes, it is. It's been a bit overcast all day, a little bit of dampness in the air too. John says, good day all, great that we're back. Marilyn says, good morning / afternoon from a sunny Denver. Janet says, hi from Mrs. Alga, warm but not hot. And Robert says, hope you're feeling well, Kim. Well, thank you all. So for anybody who's kind of tuning in going, what on earth is all this about? The fact is, for the last 3+ weeks, I've been suffering from a really bad bout of sciatica. And this can be caused, your sciatic nerve runs from your spine right down the back of your leg, down your calf, into your foot. And if it gets pinched somewhere along the line, you end up with shooting pains right down that leg. I've been finding out much more about it because, of course, once you're super in pain, you want it to stop. The first thing you do is Google it to try and find out. So there's 2 ways sciatic nerve can be caught. One is if it's actually caught in the spine, where you've got a sort of slip disc or herniated disc, which is pinching the nerve. The other is if it's in your piriformis muscle, which is basically in your butt cheek, in my case on my left butt cheek, and that's what it is for me. The muscles have tightened and spasmed around the nerve and are pinching it tight. And what happens then is the brain goes, oh, the nerve's hurting, quick, muscles, tighten up and protect it, which of course squeezes it harder, which creates this feedback loop until you end up in absolute agony shooting all the way down your leg. So I've been on various bits of medication, doing various stretches, exercises, seen a physio, all this kind of stuff, and it's taking quite a long time to get back. I found that I can't tend to stand, sit or walk for too long before the pain starts building up. So I'm hoping I will get to the end of this podcast, but please forgive me if I end up having to abandon it halfway through. Meg's joined us also, says hello everyone. So at the moment I'm fully up on my meds. I've also had a coffee, which I've found actually boosts the meds for some reason. A little bit of caffeine seems to enhance them somewhat. So what we're going to be talking about today then is, I've had 2 people send in images for critique, feedback. So Robert and John, I'll both be giving you feedback about that. And the other thing then is this looking from above. Now, it's one of those things, very often when we're taking photos of that stuff, we tend to look side on or sort of from above, like a kind of 45-degree angle. Very often we're looking down on something or towards something. But when you actually stand right above that absolute bird's eye view, you end up with something quite often a little bit different. So I thought what we would do is explore that today. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a challenge. So we're going to have the from above challenge, or shooting from above, or from overhead, or whatever I decide to call it. But anyway, it's that idea. So that challenge will be for 2 weeks' time. So what I will do, I think I will start off with the challenge because VG's joined us. Says, happy to see you came back. Hi to the new chair as well. Yes, anybody, we're well spotted there, VG. Yes, I now have a new chair in the desperate hope that it might help. My previous luxury executive pretend leather chair was all very nice and comfy and the kind of thing you just sort of sit back in, but I don't think it does your back any good. So this one is much more upright and has a little thing that you can turn which pushes out into your back to make sure that your spine stays in the right place. That's the idea with that. Oh, Stacey's joined us too. Says, good morning, sunny and warm, not blisteringly hot. Was in the 90s and very humid. Says, sorry, I haven't been here for a while, busy working on an artwork. Well, it's okay, because I haven't been here for a while either. Still, here we are, like I say. So I'm going to set a challenge. The challenge is shooting from above for in 2 weeks' time. So let's talk about what that means then. So what I will do then is let's show you some examples, and if I double click on that, we do that, and then I go here. Now, so you might have to bear with me a little bit, because sometimes having not done this for 3 or 4 weeks, 3 weeks, I think, I'm kind of feeling slightly rusty as to where all the buttons are. So, okay, let's say we take a pizza, right? Now, generally speaking, when we're taking a photo of a pizza, this is quite often what we would do with this kind of 30 to 45 degree angle, where we're trying to get the whole pizza in, and so we can see it, and we sort of, However, you can, of course, take a shot of this directly from above, and this gives us a slightly different feel. And actually, to be honest, with pizzas, this is probably the way pizzas are more often kind of photographed, because by and large this is what they tend to look like in your pizza box if you happen to have been ordering out. So let's try and find something else. So what I'm starting off here with is a few photos I did for Nico's restaurant, a Mediterranean restaurant just down the road here, and I thought it seemed to be quite a good example. Give me a few examples of what would be showing. So here's one where we did with a kind of lovely dessert and an espresso sitting on a board, nice kind of nicely presented. We've got, this is a kind of typical kind of shot showing this sort of thing. Now, another thing you can do when you're doing these kind of shots is maybe you do a bit more of a macro shot. You kind of come in close. We've got the coffee there right in the foreground. We've got this lovely pistachio. And suddenly the name of the dessert has completely slipped my mind. But that's got lovely bits of texture in there. We've got the tip of the fork in so, and it's sort of fading out into the bouquet. So but shoot it from above, and we've now got a very different kind of feel to it. We've got the roundness of the board, we've got the roundness of the cup, and then putting it on a slight diagonal there to give us that sort of little bit of extra energy, even though it's a static shot. It has a different kind of feel about it. I mean, generally speaking, when we look at cups, we tend to come at cups from this angle or this angle. We're very rarely looking directly down above our cup. We tend to sort of be holding our mug, so we've got our cup, so we've got it at an angle. You might look over it if we're dunking a biscuit in our tea or something, but rarely do we look straight down. So it does suddenly sometimes become a little bit more interesting. Let's take another example. Let's take a glass. Here's a cocktail, and here again, this is a more typical kind of angle from which we might look at it. But when we view it from if we're trying to get creative, we might decide we're going to view side on. But again, look at it from above, and at this point, we've now got a very, very different picture. At this picture here, you've got actually no sense of depth. You don't know how tall this glass is. You have to be looking. Now, if you've got it at this angle, everything's about the size of it, but you don't have any sense of what's on top particularly. Here, we have that complete sense. It's looking straight down, and it's giving us a different mood, a different feel. And this is where it kind of becomes fun, I think. So again, you take something like this, another kind of cocktail and dessert, really rather beautiful, got all these summer fruits, love of ice cream, shortbread, raspberry there on the edge of the glass. Shot from above, totally different feel to it. And this is really the kind of thing that I'm trying to talk about, is that once you sort of change the angle, when you go straight down, so it's not about, when I talk about looking down from above, I'm not talking about the 45 degrees or 80 degrees. I mean the absolute 90 degrees, the bird's eye view, straight down. And it gives you a chance to really play with shape, line, form. Then becomes about the circles or the other shapes and things like that, which I think can be a lot of fun. So, okay, what about the straightforward coffee cup? I mean, some of you have seen me use this photo before. as well. And this was one I was at Earth's Crust Bakery when they had a wee cafe there, and they have this wonderful china there, this sort of solid colour in that crockery, and they had this blue tablecloth. And I just became aware that if you kind of isolated it by looking straight down from above, it's got this very graphic quality. You become very aware that it's all circles and colour. So we've got this 2-colour image. It's all in circle. I've created a square crop for it to kind of emphasize that geometry, and then with the little handle coming out at 90 degrees and the spoon coming out at a sort of slightly off thing there, that's giving us that asymmetrical symmetry, the asymmetry that we've talked before about. Another version I've done with this, playing with this, is where I've done the same thing, put it in black and white, and I've then played around a little bit with the top here and turned that into a kind of yin-yang symbol. So you can have a lot of fun with that. So that's kind of your starting point, really. Is that you could take your existing things, whether it's a cup of coffee, plate of your dessert, a cocktail, anything sitting at the table, and just look straight down on it, see what actually happens, and see how it changes how you view the subject, because that's what this is all about. The whole point of doing this is, the interesting thing about photography in general is photography helps you to see things in a way that the eye doesn't. Because we automatically restrict the view, we edit out, we're cropping out other bits of the picture which might distract from the story we're telling, or the minute you photograph from here rather than here, you've made a conscious choice to include some things and not include others. And the camera doesn't see the world in the same way the eye does. And so part of the fun of creative photography is about trying to capture interesting images, and to enhance that notion of what is the camera showing us in a way that we don't usually see it. And so playing around with angles is one of those things. We've talked macro, where you get in really close. That's side on, absolutely side on, like some of those glasses there, is a more unusual kind of angle as well. Shooting from underneath. We were talking before about, when you can get your mobile phone. The great thing about mobile phone cameras at the bottom, you can get right down underneath the dandelions and shoot upwards towards the sky and the sun in the background in a way that it's much more difficult with your heavy SLR or DSLR to do. So that's really, this thing though is about coming straight down. I've got a couple more comments here. Okay, April, and I was just chatting away to Stacey, I think. VG's also mentioning about the fact she's been having problems with her shoulder. I hope you're on the mend with that, VG. General chit chat in there. Okay, let's carry on then. So what I've been showing you here is, generally speaking, what you've got on the table. But you can do anything. I mean, quite simply, something as simple as this. I mean, anybody who's got an SLR or a DSLR will recognise this. Kind of wee macro shot. In fact, actually, I've got a funny feeling I shot this one through a magnifying glass at one of my old cameras. And yeah, I think I did to kind of explain the way some of the blurring is on this. So that, you can isolate a little spot. And again, this sort of coming down from above. The other thing you can do is you can get creative. I mean, some of you may remember back around, it was not Christmas last Christmas, I think it was Christmas before or whatever, we were talking doing mince pie shots. And we had this one where, got this lovely old baking tray, got mince pies sitting in it, but we've also got we had this reindeer cutout and made some little pastry cutouts of the reindeer, and then kind of created a kind of a silhouette one there, had them dancing around the edge of the mince pie tray. And again, this is something that only really works looking down from above. You're creating a scene. It's a chance to play around with still life, really, but with a difference. So other options you can do is, if you're wanting to do so, straightforwardly coffee beans. Sometimes you see, often these competitions like texture or things like that, where it says fill the screen, fill the image, where you can't see the edges. Sometimes he's kind of looking straight down things, so whether it's peas or beans or stones, pebbles, strawberries, any kind of fruit or nuts or coffee beans or anything like that. This is an ideal thing. You put a tray or a cup or a bowl of whatever it is you want to do, and then shoot straight down into it. That can be a lot of fun too. Now, another thing you can do is when you decide to really sort of place a whole bunch of things together. So you're back to Nico's again. This was done as a kind of a poster shot, or or maybe even a banner image, where we've got all these different dishes, and then we've put them on the table, and then again looking straight down gives us much more a sense of all the different dishes. Whereas if I was down at a 45-degree angle, you would have the ones at the front would take dominance, and the ones that are further away would just sort of disappear a bit and not really be noticed. Another thing to play around with is the idea of essentially like a kit. So this one was done for Livingston's tailors across the road from where I live. And what this is all the elements that go into making a suit. And from the suit, the actual material, the blue material in the background, to the buttons, to zips, to fasteners, to bits on the inside, inner linings, the thread, reinforced padding bits, all these bits and pieces actually. So we did a whole sequence of photos of a suit being made from start to finish. And this then was like the opening photo, which is, here are all the bits that go into making a suit. And so something like that can be fun as well. So if you, for example, if you're somebody who, say, you make teddy bears or something like that, perhaps you can do something where it becomes like, it's still life. Before I start, we've got the cloth, we've got the scissors, we've got tape measure, we've got stuffing, we've got the eyes, we've got ribbon, whatever else it is you're going to do, but lay it out and then shoot down from above. Some of you will, I'm sure, in amateur photography magazines or things like that, often you'll see somebody, a photographer, some famous photographer, and he's laid out his kit, so that's shot down from above. And sometimes so this is that kind of thing, obviously not cameras. So this shot was done for a person who had a French horn. And I can't remember exactly, but this French horn is over 100 years old, might be 150 years old or something like that. And one of the interesting things was that the guy who had it only ever felt like he was custodian of it for the time, that he would have this for 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30 years, whatever, but then it would then be sold on and carry on going. This French horn was around long before him, and it would carry on. But each person who'd had this French horn had then had photos of themselves taken with it. And part of the set of photos I did a couple of portraits of him holding it, blowing into it. But he also wanted to get a set, he also wanted to have the whole set, because it also came in this beautiful red velvet lined box as well, and I got photos of that. And you've got all these different extensions and parts. To be honest, I'm not a French horn expert, so I don't really know anything about this, but whether it's the mouthpiece down here, or all these different things here are all slightly different lengths, and so depending on what's slotted in where, changes the key that you're playing in. So a longer tube will create a deeper note. A smaller tube will create a higher note. And then sometimes you've got things like, so you've got a round. But it's not always just straightforwardly. It's because this one here looks bigger than this. But if you notice, this one is layered. There's sort of more, there's 3 levels there, whereas there's 2 levels in that one. So that might be smaller, but it might be just as long. Or you've got this kind of bit here, which then becomes an extension on the inside. In fact, actually, or did they all become extensions on the inside? I can't remember. However, it's this idea, to stop me going off on tangents of how instruments are made. The point being is that you can take all the pieces and you can lay them out and create, again, something very graphic, a kind of graphic quality to these. The other thing, of course, you can do is flowers. And, again, most flowers we often take from the side, or we take from sort of slightly above again. But this notion of when you're looking straight down into the top of a flower, what also tends to make this interesting is where are you going to focus? Because if you focus in the bottom of the flower, the top of the flower is quite, the top of the petals or the stamen is likely to be out of focus. And one of the things you tend to find when you're photographing flowers is really the stamen or the central part, the bit that's most likely to draw the eye, has to be the bit that's in focus. So in this case, this bit being bright yellow in the middle of the purple tulip, the purple and white tulip, it was important that this bit was in focus. And by having this bit in focus on the same level, we're getting the tips over here, we're getting a few little bits of the raindrops in focus here and here, which add to some interesting texture. But overall, it gives us a quite interesting, fun shape. Another one, this tulip. And again, the tulip, because we're coming down from the top and it's got all these wonderful raindrops on it, we're wanting to get the very tip of it just in focus here, and then we're getting lovely bits of reflections of the trees above here in the water drops. Also, what tends to happen with these drops as well is they tend to magnify slightly. You can see that the texture underneath here then gets magnified in that little kind of ball of water there as well. So something like this, you know, can look really beautiful. You have a very narrow depth of field. You know, you're going for your f1.2 or f1.8 or f2.8, or if you're using a macro lens or something like that, and you're getting in as close as possible and allowing the bokeh to kind of fade away from it. And it's a different view of a tulip. It's not a view of a tulip that we generally see, and so it kind of grabs our attention that little bit more. A peony, the peony, just as it's starting to open, looking down into the depths of it. And again, instead here, we're not sort of focusing on the outer petals, we're focusing right into the middle, as, you know, just into that center part here, as it's sort of just starting to kind of unfurl. Or your classic rose, very, very silky texture. And again, you're trying to get the top, the tips here are the bits that are in focus, and then it very quickly fades off. So really, that's what it's about. This is what I really want to kind of get across, is this notion of looking down from above. There's so many different interpretations you can do. So hopefully I'm just kind of giving you a little taster here. So whether that's food or it's cutlery or it's crockery, something that you would have on your table, you can create little still life scenes, whether it's a collection of objects that are going into making something like, you know, like the teddy bear, or maybe if you wanted to do something like making your coffee. So you have your coffee beans, you have a coffee grinder, you have a little espresso pot, you have a little espresso mug, or something like that. There are any number of options you can do where you create a collection, like a still life collection, of what's going to make something. There's the notion of the flowers in the garden. There's the notion of even things like, you know, coffee beans or fruit or nuts or Lego pieces for that matter. But it's this whole idea of what I'm looking for then is the straight down look from above. So this then is the challenge. So the challenge for in 2 weeks time. So it's currently the 27th. So I think it's the 11th of 10th. I think it's the 10th of September. So get your photos, start thinking about this, start playing. Play with a number of ideas. I'd like to say, I don't want photos that are taking at a bit of an angle. I want photos that are absolutely straight down. Now, maybe you find an interesting stairwell for that matter. You know, if you can get up to the very top and then look all the way down, that's another one. But again, it's got to be straight down, not at an angle. There's a whole bunch of different interpretations if you can get onto the top of a building, or like I say, top of a stairwell. It doesn't have to be small like the things that I've shown you. It can be much bigger. So this challenge then from above, we'll just call it for the moment from above, but it's that from above looking down at 90 degrees. So you've got 2 weeks then to get your images in for that challenge. Start playing around with them, start submitting them by the beginning of next week. And then in 2 weeks' time, what I'll do is we'll go through the photos, make sure you're submitting, tell me something about them as well. Tell me what it is we're looking at, because sometimes it's not always that obvious when you're looking at a strange angle, or any interesting bits about the story, whether there was something interesting about gathering the bits together, something interesting happened in the case of taking the photos, or something you felt you learned in the process. And then in 2 weeks' time, when we look through the photos, I'll read out the little stories and bits that go along with them, and hopefully we will all become inspired to try each other's ideas out as well, because every one of you is going to try something slightly different, and even if two of you decide to shoot exactly the same thing, you will go about it a slightly different way. That's the most wonderful thing about photography, and that means that whatever anybody does is then open to inspiring somebody else to have that, try and do their version of it as well. So really looking forward to seeing what you can come up with that. I'll do a wee reminder of that at the end of the podcast as well. I can see there's a couple more comments come in. VG said, above shots are really good. And where else have we got? Stacey and April are having a chat to each other. Oh, Jack's joined us and says hello, everyone. Yeah, April and Stacey carrying on the chat. Okay, April says, I love this tulip with the water drops. VG says, looking forward. Meg says, I checked just now and it is the 10th of September. Okay, cool. So thank you, Meg. So 10th of September it is then to get, well, that'll be when it's going out. So try and get your images in before that. 8th of September is really the kind of latest. If you can get them in earlier, it certainly makes my life a lot easier. Right, okay, so as a little reminder then, if you're finding these podcasts interesting, useful or entertaining, then do consider supporting them with buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Certainly one of the ways you can do it. Also make sure you invite your friends along as well. And especially, I mean, that's another thing actually, for some people, maybe things like the challenge are quite often, it's quite a good way to get your friends involved as well, is when we've got a challenge on. You might get a few people, because there maybe some people I know I always feel slightly wary about the idea of turning up and putting in something for critique and feedback, because they don't want to kind of the fear of humiliation of being told they've got something wrong. Obviously you guys know it's not like that, but anybody who's not already involved isn't so sure. But to be able to say to your friends, oh look, you know, watching this podcast and he's got one of these challenges, saw one of your photos, thought you might like to join in too. Maybe it's another way of getting some people to come and join in. Anyway, there's a thought. All right, so what we're going to do now then is I'm going to move on to Robert and John for the feedback session now. So well, let's start with Robert. So Robert said, here's a photo I took last year in New Orleans. So let's show you this photo. And he says, black and white seems to be a better look for it. However, when I submitted it to the Dallas Camera Club, it did not do well. Evidently, the title Between 1231 and 1233 was perplexing. Let me know what you think. Making the background darker was a suggestion. I tend to agree with that assessment. Okay, so Robert sent in, we've got this guy sitting here staring at the camera, sitting on a kind of a step platform here. It's called Between 1231 and 1233. Now that means it could have been taken at just past noon at 1232. However, up here we can see there's a 1231 on the door. So we guess then that because there's also a bit of a door over here, probably this door says 1233 and he's sitting between the two doors. But we've got to make the assumption. And by and large, one of the things you quite often find, if you're putting things in for competitions and what have you, something that might be very obvious to you isn't necessarily obvious to everybody else. And the more somebody has to work something out, the more chance there is of them not working it out. So somebody might see that and go between 1231 and 1233. They might even notice that it says 1231 and go, but where's the 1233? And as much as you get it, and maybe one or two other people get it, there will be some people who don't. Now, it's a tricky one, because then do you always have to take into consideration, if you like, the lowest common denominator? No, you don't. However, if you are putting things in for competitions, or you're putting them in where there's a lot of other photos going in and any kind of judge is not spending a great deal of time looking at your image is which is one of hundreds if not thousands, then having a title which requires a little bit of working out might end up playing against you, even if under other circumstances it might be seen as a little bit witty or a little bit challenging, a little bit of, oh yeah, now I see what you mean, that's an interesting one. sometimes it can work against you. So it's one of those things that you have to balance up. And if you're saying what you actually do say was evidently the title was perplexing for some, then that's kind of what you've got. Another problem that you potentially have with this is that when you look at this photo, the 1231 itself isn't standing out at all. You've got to zoom in to know it's there. It's the same colour as the door. So when we look at this photo, the first thing we do is we look at the bloke. We look at this guy here, we look at his face, we look at the eyes because they're looking back at us. So that's what we see. So consequently, I think the 1231 itself could get missed. Now, if this was if the 1231 was lighter than the door, and so drew your attention to it, then that might make a little bit more sense. More people are perhaps likely to then understand the fact that this one over here is on the right is probably 1233. However, there's a couple of other things about this this picture that I think lends. Now, the first thing I think I'm struck with really here is the fact that the man himself doesn't actually stand out that much against the background, or more specifically, his face doesn't. And part of this is kind of a problem that we've talked before about, Robert, which is overcooking it. Or essentially what you've done is you've upped the texture or the clarity, you've whacked up the sliders on this, presumably to give his rugged face that much more texture, and that's fine, I can understand that. However, what it's done is it's also made the wall much more textured as well. And because his face is right next to this wall and you've got a lot of texture here and a lot of texture there, it's tended to mean that it's not actually, his face is not standing out as much against the wall. And when people have said maybe make the wall darker, actually another way of doing this is to make the face lighter. Now, rather wonderfully, as Robert usually does, Robert has sent me the raw image so we can actually take a look and see what it is that he was dealing with. Now, this becomes interesting. When we see the colour version, instantly he stands out much more against it. I mean, although we still do have the problem that he's got essentially a pink face against a pink background. Now, interestingly, when I zoom in here, he's not quite in focus. There's quite a bit of noise here as well. But he's not actually in focus either. Now, if I scroll down here a bit, now, his jeans are in focus. This knee is in focus. That knee, not quite. This knee is. So actually what's happened then, clearly, is when you've taken this shot has focused in on his knee, which is slightly closer to the camera than his face is. You've got this at f4.5. It's a 24 to 105 at 105. Okay, so you're zoomed in. You've zoomed in the maximum you can on your 24 to 105mm lens. By zooming in, you've compressed the amount of depth of field that you have. So you've actually got not a lot of actual depth of field to be sharp in. And so even though his head is only slightly behind his knee, it's his knee that's in focus, not his face. So his face being slightly out of focus. Also, by the look of it, because of although it's only an ISO 400, by the time we zoom into his face, it's starting to look a little bit noisy. Makes me feel that maybe what you've also done is, when converting from RAW, the detail bit, RAW seems to automatically whack up the sharpening to 40. What I tend to like to do is take the luminance and take that up to about 10 or something, just to soften some of the over sharpening that I think. Sometimes I take the sharpening down as well, but just to sort of soften it a little bit. So I'd maybe at the very least start with that. So we take that and let's just kind of open this and start thinking about the crop. Now, part of the reason for you cropping like this is the fact that we've got this person here on the right. Now, and if we wanted to take in, you've got that go back to your title, between 1231 and 1233, well, we can now see the 1233. However, also, the writing is black, but the door is pale green. So actually, that stands out much more. So part of the problem here then has also been your conversion to black and white. Your conversion to black and white has darkened the doors so that the doors in black and white have become the same tone as the numbers. And that's meant that the numbers didn't stand out as much. So when you've got this bit of the picture, which says between 1231 and 1233, and nobody can actually, or few people are actually even noticing the 1231, it makes even less sense. So you could, if you wanted, now, okay, so let's just straighten that first of all. So we'll get a bit of his foot in. We bring that down here. Now the problem is if we wanted to keep the 1233 in, we end up with this person here. So now it might be, depending on if you've got beta or you want to play around with photoshopping a bit, is it possible to essentially remove this person? And let's just see whether it fills in the gap here. Yeah, not brilliant, but it's a start. Yeah, okay. Let's say you could play around a little bit if you really wanted to get into your Photoshop and create, fill in the gaps. So that then becomes a little bit more of an option. Just seen left a little bit of white down there, so we could do that. And so here we go. So that then, as a between 1231 and 1233, as such, makes much more instant sense to it. And we can see him much more clearly, because if we go back to here, we can see the doors are dark. Notice again how the numbers are not standing out against the dark, but the walls themselves feel quite dark, and then his face is just kind of blending into it. So if I just duplicate that layer, let's go back into Camera Raw and play around with the black and white filters and see what we can do. So if I turn to black and white, now what might actually happen here is I might need to sort of do this twice. I might need to do sort of one set of black and white for the background and one for his face, because what I really want is I want to have a lighter face. So if I go to the black and white mixer here, see if I start now, if I lighten the reds, that's not actually lightening his face so much as it is lightening the bandana. Orange, where's the face gone? Okay, yellows. Strangely enough, he doesn't seem to be, he's actually got more going on in the magentas than he does anything else. So I'm going to lighten up that magenta a little bit. Maybe if I take those reds, no, keep the reds down. Where's the background then? There we go. Those walls are registering as orange. So you could just kind of nudge them down a little bit. Take that red up a little bit maybe for the bandana, or take the red down. Maybe take the red down actually. So the red and orange are making the, but what we're not going to do is play with the greens of the doors. You must have had a slightly different, I'm not getting that obvious kind of dark for the doors. I think the doors are okay like that. So if we then do something like that, we've got him stand, but maybe we want to lighten the face a little bit. So maybe at this point, actually, we just go in and do a little bit of dodge and burn. And if I take the dodge tool, set this mid-tones exposure, I've got this exposure at 8. Actually, tell you what, let's just, and then just slightly run over this. And then we lighten his, we've got to be careful about overdoing it, but we lighten his face against the background. And what I might do is just a little bit of burn tool, just to kind of create slightly more contrast. Get his eyes standing out a little bit more depth in his beard and his neck there. And now I think what we tend to find is, you can see that the face stands out. I might have just overdone that a little bit, but you get the idea. Because we've darkened the background around it, the face is standing out that little bit more. What we might also want to do is, because his is potentially, so to go back, say, let's duplicate that again, and say you were wanting to add that bit more texture, but we only really want it in the face. We don't want it into everything else. So if we go back to the basic and let's zoom in here, and you wanted to play with, say, a little bit of contrast, a little bit of texture, clarity slider, something like that. Now, what happens here is everything else gets a bit too detailed. So we mask that back in and then just take the brush and then make sure that's on white and just paint that back in for the face itself. So you can see then that we can have his nice kind of rough face. If you wanted to maybe add a little bit onto the arms or even the texture of his jeans, you can. But what we're not wanting, actually for that matter, you could just highlight those numbers as well if you wanted. But you don't really want to be doing it with the wall behind him, because the wall itself is already a bit too textured. And something like this then is really giving you the picture you wanted. However, at this point, if you wanted to go back to your original crop and take out the 1232, and we come here, now, whether you want to keep it square and include that drink that's sitting there, you didn't, you just took the tip off. So we take something like that then, and now we've got the guy sitting there, and it's just a little bit more obvious. Maybe just come down here. So now when you talk about the idea of between 1231 and 1233, we can now see the 1231 much more clearly, and it becomes a little bit more obvious that the 1233 is probably there. But if you wanted to have less of a an issue with that, then if this is called between 1231 and 1233, it then becomes a much more obvious kind of title. But like I say, that's one of those kind of things that's sort of slightly personal. Depends who you're showing it to, the kind of people who are looking at it as to whether they want the literal response like this, so you can see both numbers, or maybe you change the title completely. But these are options. These are one of those things you've got to remember, that if you're doing something like this crop where you're mentioning two numbers but you're not actually showing the second number, not everybody is going to fill in the blanks as such. Might be obvious to you, might be obvious to your wife, might be obvious to your handful of friends, but it's not necessarily obvious to everybody else. But that's then a kind of decision you need to make for you and where it's being shown. So I hope that kind of answers that. Quite a kind of in-depth response there, but I hope that gives you some thoughts and ideas there. Okay, so thank you for sending that one in, Robert. Couple of more comments here. April says, wouldn't camera clubs just take more time to observe one's work versus sites like photographing in general? Yeah, generally speaking, they do, April. I think generally camera clubs do tend to. But even then, I think part of the problem with the likes of the number not being clear in the way that Robert had edited it didn't really help much. But yes, it does. You're right. It does depend on who's looking at it, and and this is part of your decision-making process. John says, I see a lot of character in the man. It would be an interesting subject in many settings. I think you're probably right there. April says, I find it frustrating when someone or something ruins a perfect photo. If that woman was not there, it would be perfect. Well, that happens all the time, except it's kind of a bit rude to turn around and say, so, excuse me, please, do you mind moving for 3 minutes just while I try and line up and get this photo over here? That's why the really great photos that are street photography, that are, just captured as they were, are really rare and really hard to get, because nearly always something is in the way, something isn't quite as you would like it. My way around this, I do stage narrative scenes. I control all the elements, and I tell people, okay, let's move you here, let's move there, let's move the lighting over there. That's my way around getting around that frustration. But yes, it is a frustration. And Stacey says people are unpredictable if you're at a distance, but even close, and taking a photograph, they just tend to get in the way regardless. I like the recommendations. Stacey wondering if it'd be different if you crop the gates. Well, yeah, we played around with that. So Robert says, thank you, I have a better perspective on the picture now. Great. And April says, this is great, Kim. Good. Cool. Excellent. Right, so let's move on then. So now I'm going to move on to John. Now, a really interesting photo from John, though we have problems with quality, but if the quality was there, wow, what a shot. I mean, to have this cow, steer, like right above this guy, I mean, wow, that's a moment captured. It really is. Although the problem that we have here is it's ever so noisy. The colours aren't really allowing us to get the right bits to stand out, and so the edit and the crop and everything else isn't necessarily bringing out the best in it. So John says, with this, the photo was taken at dusk, a little past the blue hour, at the local rodeo here in Ohio. My issue is to stop the action I need at a fast shutter speed. Yep, absolutely. Something like this, you've got to be having a shutter speed of 400th of a second, 600th of a second, even 1,000th of a second. If you're playing shooting rodeos and you're wanting, then you've got to have that kind of high shutter speed. However, he goes on. The problem is with the fast shutter speed is I lose light or exposure. This is true. Fast shutter speed, a lot less light getting in. So you then need to either have a very wide aperture or a very high ISO, or a mixture of both. goes on. I've never shot a rodeo at this location before. Had I used a flash, I'm not sure the light would reach the action. Now, you're probably right. A flash in this situation wouldn't work. You're looking at a great big stadium. You're presumably not... You must be zoomed in on this. There's no way you're going to be standing in the middle of this when all this is going on. So if you're in the safe seats, you're going to be back a bit. You will have zoomed in. And if you're zooming in, a flash going off where you are is barely going to light anything. In fact, all it's really going to do is your camera settings will just go completely into the dark and very little will show up at all. So you're saying, I'm wondering what I could do to get sharp photos in low light in a situation like this. I would like to try it again soon. Thanks as always. Okay, excellent. So this is the shot then. This is the edited shot. But wonderfully, John has sent me the raw file. So let's open this up and actually see. Now you see, when we come to the raw file, this is what we see. So he's got an ISO 100. Now you see, the ISO 100 really surprised me, given the fact that this is so noisy. But then the realization comes is that it's so noisy because this has been so dark, you've had to raise the exposure a lot, and that's caused a lot of noise. Now, okay, I will come back to that in a moment. Let's go back to here. So what we've got then is it's shot in the blue hour. You've got a 100 ISO at 1/400th of a second. Okay, good. That's what you needed. You've got it at f5. Now f5, yeah, okay, you could get away with that. But the 100 ISO, that's what's playing against you here. Now, we obviously want to avoid, generally speaking, we want to avoid using high ISO if we can. However, if your choice is between using a high ISO and having a picture that's too dark, use the higher ISO. Now, I cannot remember what episode it was, but I do know somewhere in the episodes I did a thing talking about ISO where I talk about the difference between if you take a 100 ISO but you end up with a very dark picture and then you lighten it, as opposed to say taking a 1000 ISO but you don't have to lighten it. Although you end up with noise in both, you end up with less noise in the higher ISO, in the 1000 ISO. The 100 ISO hasn't really caught as much information in the darks. You can only bring out so much. You are better off shooting at an ISO that gives you a proper exposure than you are at shooting massively under the ISO and then trying to lighten it up. If you shoot this low ISO and then try and lighten it, you end up with a worse overall. You end up with more noise in it. I cannot remember. I remember going through and showing some examples. Now it's probably a couple of years ago now. Maybe worth doing again at some point. But this sequence, it's worth. I mean, just try it yourself. Take a photo at 100 ISO. Take a photo at 1000 ISO, where the exposure would be 1000 ISO, and so where the 100 then becomes dark, and then lighten it in Photoshop or Affinity or whatever, and you will see it has more noise than the 1000 ISO. So with something like this, what I would say is fine, have your 400th of a second, fine, have your f5.6. Put your ISO on auto. Just let the camera sort out the best ISO. Your most important point, the most important thing for you to do is catch the action. Okay? So you need to have the fast shutter speed because, again, this photo means nothing if it's out of focus, if it's blurry. You've got to have enough depth of field, so you need a 5.6 or more in order to be able to allow for that leeway because everything's moving. You don't want it focused on the cowboy behind and actually the action itself has gone out of focus. So you do need a bit of depth of field. So your only solution after that is allow the ISO to go auto. Now, something like this might then have gone an auto ISO 800 or ISO 1200, but I still think you would have ended up with less noise if you'd done that. So let's go to this. Now, if I click auto on this, because the sky is not wanting to make the sky too light, so it's still left this a bit dark. So I'll take the auto off and I'm going to pretty much ignore the sky and I'm going to kind of think, well, okay, how much do we need to bring this up in order to get the action, in order for us to be able to see what's going on here? And we're really having to bring that up 4, 3. So, okay, let's go up a little bit more. So we take that up to there. Now, maybe if I boost the whites a little bit, just make that slightly more highlight. No, I don't want to take the highlights. Contrast. Okay, I'm going to have to lighten that up to there. And we are getting noisy, although not quite as noisy as yours was. And at this point, we can go down to the detail part. And here's where you see the sharpening and the luminance and the noise reduction. Now, because we've lightened it, we end up with a little bit more color noise. So you can take the color, move this to the right a bit, and that takes out some of the color noise. And then we take the luminance up and just soften that a little bit. And we can see now that we've actually got rid of quite a bit of the noise in there. So we've actually got quite a lot bit more detail here. Now we've got this. We maybe want to, if we play with the texture a little bit, yeah, just create a little bit more sharpness. Maybe that clarity. Clarity's doing kind of nice things there. Watch those shadows though. Maybe bring the shadows up a touch more. Although we are starting to, again, we're getting into the noise, but I think that's probably about the maximum you can push that. So let's do that. Let's just close that one of Robert's just now and come back to here. So now we've lost the sky, but the sky isn't really where the action's happening. The other problem you've got here is that you are zoomed right out. And I seem to remember in that photo, in fact, let's just open that again because I just want to double check those settings. You've got a 24 to 200 mil lens, so you've got a really strong zoom, except for the fact you're at 40 mil, so you've actually got it really quite pulled out. That has given you a bigger depth of field, which an f5, if you were zoomed in, an f5 you might have run into the same problem as Robert, that, you know, something in the foreground would be in focus, but the actual action isn't. So it's a kind of tricky one, but again, you want to be closer in than that if you can be. Try and get as far into the action as you can. Although again, if you're zoomed in, you might need to go higher. You might need to go to something like 600th of a second, because of the more you're zoomed in, the more any slight wobble of the camera is going to become exaggerated. However, okay, so part of the problem we've also got then is that because the amount of information we're losing, if you consider that this here is 4,500 pixels wide. But if we go down to where the action is, which is here, that's now only 1,500 pixels wide. So we've lost 2/3 of the picture on the outside and 2/3 of the picture on the top. So actually, we've lost 90% of the pixels, pretty much, or 80 to 90% of the pixels available to us. So there's not a lot left at this point. At this point, okay, we maybe straighten that a little bit. And then we've got the guy running in here, we've got the guy running out there. Maybe we come down just a little bit closer. We're trying to get in as close as we can to see where the action is. And that's really where the action is. Now, if we just take a quick look at your version of it, you've got the action there. You've cropped off this guy running in on the edge here, which I think is probably a little bit of a kind of a bit too tight. I prefer to have a little bit of him in, so because that's kind of giving us this sense of movement towards it. We could maybe just bring that in, but I do think keep his heel in place. Let's duplicate that again and see if we can do anything else to enhance this central bit where the action is happening. So I think, for example, so one of the first things we can do is just add a bit of a vignette, because a vignette will kind of close down the eyes from shooting out the outside. Play with the contrast a touch. Maybe you've got to up that exposure a little bit more, contrast a little bit more, although bring the shadows up a touch, clarity a little bit more, maybe. It's a tricky one here, it's a tricky one. Again, we're starting to get very noisy, but if we put the noise reduction up too much, it's going to start getting too soft. So I think then at this point, this is maybe looking, yep, let's bring our attention slightly better to the middle. Another option here is maybe where what we do is we take the curves and essentially darken down the whole photo a little bit more, but then mask back in the central part. So in essence, we're kind of creating a little bit more. Now you want to have a very soft edge on this so that you've not got a sharp line. Maybe then if I do drop that down to something like that and just kind of taking little bits of edge here. So you can see over here that what we're doing is soft. So we're just allowing that central bit to be a little bit lighter, and then that's able to kind of grab our attention a little bit more as well. Other options, you could even, let's say I duplicate that layer for a moment, and then what if I was to desaturate, not the whole thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the colors down, not completely, but just a little bit more, like that. But again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint them back in. So I'm going to go to 100%. Just bring them back onto the steer and the guy on the ground, like that. And then it's very subtle, but with everything else around just slightly desaturated and a little bit more colour coming out where the action is. Like the darkening, our eye gets drawn to the lighter patch, and the desaturation brings our eyes to... Now, we don't want to oversaturate, but bringing it back up to normal saturation and slightly, in fact, we could even take this, and now you can see we could desaturate the background. Now, I don't like that colour pop, but if you're kind of playing around, so it still needs to look slightly natural to the point whereby it stops looking natural. You're kind of moving this about, so in this case about -43, and I think you can just about get away with that. And now at this point then we've got the fact that you can see, I think it's just drawing that little bit more attention to the action that's going on here. So I think overall your edit is something like this. Another option with the edit as well is this guy here, is to actually take him out completely, and then you bring in, and then we concentrate it that much more onto, that's quite a nice crop there. That's bringing in our attention completely. We're not now worrying about the guy running in at all. This is all then about the steer above the rider and these guys getting out of the way as fast as possible, with this guy looking down, clearly worried for the guy on the floor. That's quite a nice crop, but the problem is at this point, from your original photo, you've lost so much information that this is at 100%, and at 100% it's not even filling my screen. So you're pushing it as a web photo, let alone something you might print. So ultimately then, John, what we're talking about is the idea that in order for your best chance of getting good rodeo shots is you need to make sure that your exposure is going to be as good a natural exposure as you can. Don't underexpose with the idea that you're going to lighten it afterwards, because your picture quality will end up worse. So make sure it's going to be fast enough shutter speed. So yes, you want your minimum of 400th of a second, possibly 500th of a second. You need to make sure that you have a reasonable depth of focus, so make sure your aperture is at least probably 5.6. You also, where you can, you've got your zoom lens, zoom in a bit more. Don't try and take in the whole stadium. If the action's happening in this bit, try and get as much of it filling your lens as you can. Now obviously you want to be careful you don't get in too close, because then if it moves out of the action it's very difficult to follow. You've got to give yourself a bit of leeway, but it's better to be able to crop in and lose 1,000 pixels than have to crop in and lose 3,000 pixels when you've got a 4,500 pixel wide image. So I hope that makes sense. So with that in mind, then the last bit is to allow the ISO on your camera to find its own natural point. So you fix your shutter speed, you fix your aperture, and then you set the ISO to auto. That really will give you the best option for the ISO, and then where you can, you try and correct with noise reduction software or noise reduction sliders and what have you afterwards. And then also, if you are trying to bring in the action, the next question is, how do you make sure the action comes to this, our eye gets drawn to this bit when there's quite a lot of else going on it? Part of that's the crop, part of it can be lightening and darkening, just allowing the eye to come to that lighter part, and very subtly maybe even colour shifting, desaturating slightly on the outside, so again the eye goes to where the colour is. Not as much as a colour pop or selective colour, but just subtly enough so that people don't even realise their eyes are getting drawn to it. So those are the kind of tools that you've got at your disposal, and I hope that makes sense. Right, okay, so a couple of got some more comments here. Where are we? Stacey says, wow. April says, this is crazy, scary, great moment, very dramatic. I see the explanation. Okay, John says, I kept the Zoom open because I was not sure where the action was going to be. Yeah, and that's fair enough. I get that. I absolutely understand. But really, yeah, I mean, it's a compromise. You know, the number of shots you're going to get, which you take away, which are absolute clear winners, is always going to be fairly small. It's going to get better the more you do it, obviously, with practice. What you're trying to do is just maximise your chances here. So yes, you do need a bit of leeway, but I think you could probably have got in closer than you did. Rosemary says, that is an amazing action shot, John. What a challenging situation to be shooting in. You've done a great job in a difficult scene. I hope the cowboy was okay. April likes the edit, and John says, thanks, Kim. Very good information. Okay, well, that's great. So thank you very much for sending that in, John. So that brings us pretty much to the end of this podcast. We're reminded that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, or entertaining, please consider supporting them by buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. So, what we're going to now, next week, what I'm going to be doing is some of you, do you remember me, Annaliese and Phil? I did some photos of them. I've shown before. There was some really deeply emotional ones of the two of them in a bath with clothes on. But there was also, I did this one very Wes Anderson style, sitting on a sea wall. Well, I did another set of photos with them, actually down at the sea wall. And I finally got round to editing them. Again, very cinematic, and I'm really kind of keen to show them off, to be honest. So I think you will find this. So we're kind of doing a little return to cinematic next week, and I'll show you some of those photos that I did with Annaliese and Phil. So I'm really looking forward to you seeing them, and hopefully it could act as a little kind of reminder on this idea of remembering to play with that notion of the cinematic crop when it occurs, when the option's available to you. 2 weeks' time then, it will be the From Above challenge. So the challenge is being set now, all the beginning of this. If you came in late, go back, watch the beginning of the podcast. And so what we're talking about then is I want the photos from directly above looking down. Not looking at an angle, but directly above. See what you can find that's interesting. Think about shape and form and line. Think about things that we don't usually see from directly above. Pizzas, we quite often do. But certain drinks we quite often don't. Are there things, those stairwell images always look interesting when you look straight down at them. Or like I say, even from coffee beans to pistachio nuts to, I don't know, a didgeridoo funnel or something. Use your imagination. Or like I say, you could do layouts. You know, if I was to, if you're going to be making something, what are the elements that go into making them before they get assembled? You know, if you're making a little Batmobile, lay out the pieces first. Have the actual built piece in the middle of it. Something, whatever it is. There's so many options for the From Above. And I want you to play with this idea. Have fun with it. And then send me your images. And in 2 weeks' time, then we will look through those together. So that's us. I seem to have managed it. I've got through... yeah, basically, we've got through an hour. I've managed to stand here. I might have to go and have a little lie down for a bit. But thank you to everybody who's joined in with the conversation. Everybody's turned up, and thank you for your patience for the last 3 weeks. Before we managed to get around to finally doing this podcast. Yeah, that basically draws us to a close. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye bye.